Well, we all know who JFK is. JFK, despite facing many failures to stopping the spread of communism, let's launch a secret invasion to overthrow Castro.
Take the L, kid.
Dang it. Man, these Soviets don't understand that East Berlin is theirs and West Berlin is ours. Nobody builds a wall better than me. Believe me, I will build a great, great wall. Dang it. Mr. JFK, there's a crisis in Cuba. Is there a hurricane there? It's hurricane season. I'm afraid it's worse, sir. The Soviets stationed missiles in our backyard. Dang it. Well, anyway, JFK believed that he could put a strong stop to communism in Vietnam. He would send advisors and financial aid to support South Vietnam at the cost that they use their own military power to win against the North. Sir, reports from Vietnam. Great. What is it? Sir, they are struggling and their government is very corrupt. Dang it! The US would send even more military advisors and equipment to give the South a stronger advantage, but the South continued to meet silly defeats. Sir, there have been no improvements in Vietnam.
Huh? What? We gave them everything. How aren't they winning? We can't do everything for them.
Also, sir, Southern President Ngo Dinh Diem was assassinated.
Dang.
JFK was assassinated less than a month after Diem's death. 1964, U.S. Navy ship USS Maddox was monitoring signals from North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Navy ship shot warning shots at some Vietnamese torpedo boats who then went full torpedo and machine gun mode back at them. A storm also called for a false alarm of another attack on the USS Maddox. Well, anyway, LBJ, who is in office... Wait a minute. LeBron James?
The greatest player of all time.
LBJ, as in Lyndon B. Johnson, uses the USS Maddox incident to sway Congress in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
We should be getting revenge. We should bomb them. They attacked us twice.
Excuse me, sir. The second time was a storm.
Yeah, so bomb them anyway.
Don't we have to declare war on them, sir? So, Congress, do you pass it, please and thank you?
We pass it.
The resolution allowed LBJ to escalate the war in Vietnam without an official declaration of war. The draft was still taking place in the US, which caused many young men to try and avoid it when tensions grew in Vietnam. LBJ knew of this problem and, alright, I, Lyndon B. Johnson, promise that we are not about to send American boys 9 or 10,000 miles away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing themselves. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, the NLF grew in numbers rapidly in the south. Ho Chi Minh would also grow close with the other communist leaders, who would aid North Vietnam with military supplies. The Battle of Binh Gia proved to everyone that the Viet Cong guerrillas were capable of wiping South Vietnamese forces, meaning the Southern Army was fatally weak despite all the help from the US. The NLF proceeded to attack many US air bases to stop US powers from aiding the South, which caused LBJ to order Operation Rolling Thunder, bombing many areas of North Vietnam and deploying the first US ground troops in Da Nang. Hey you, viewer, do you see this trail? That's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It allowed the North to send reinforcements and supplies to the Viet Cong via a route through Laos and Cambodia. Laos was also in a proxy war of the Cold War, which allowed the US to do Operation Barrel Roll, dropping bombs such as napalms on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Napalms had this jelly-like gasoline that was highly flammable, which was perfect for the jungle. By 1965, 200,000 US troops were stationed in Vietnam to defend the South, but many of them lacked motivation due to taking too many L's in battle and its harsh conditions of the environment, until this man came along. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. If you don't fight, you cannot win. William Westmoreland believed that the best way to win was to destroy and eliminate as many Viet Cong forces before they could act. Operations like Search and Destroy focused on this objective. The US would gain reinforcements from the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization and other anti-communist nations. Also, the Montagnards, who were the indigenous people of the Central Highlands of Vietnam, revolted against both warring parties to stop the oppression of their race. Ho Chi Minh's thoughts on the US were, they want to make war for 20 years, then we shall make war for 20 years. If they want to make peace, we shall make peace and invite them for a play date. I mean, tea party. No, just tea afterwards. However, the US was too fearful of the domino effect, so Ho Chi Minh's wishes of peace were never granted. The Vietnam War was a battle between the US's military and technology advantage versus the NLF's and North Vietnam's knowledge of the land. Speaking of knowledge of the land, the Viet Cong had a network of underground tunnels known as the Co Chi tunnels, the underground city to camp out, launch surprise attacks, or maneuver all over the countryside secretly in South Vietnam. Tunnel rats were troops specialized in this dangerous task of destroying these tunnels as well as gaining intel on them and capturing or eliminating the enemy. The US also used Operation Wandering Souls to lure out the Viet Cong in these tunnels or the jungle in situations like this.
Ooh, spooky, I'm a ghost, I was your friend.
It's 1968, Year of the Monkey. Tut is finally here. Ah yes, Year of the Monkey is here. Lion dances, music, firecrackers. Song Wukong, the great Monkey King, it's your year. What could go wrong? There's a truce. Hey there. While South Vietnam celebrated Lunar New Year's, believing there was a truce, the North and Viet Cong launched a surprise offensive all over the South. 85,000 troops attacking over 100 cities, including Saigon, where the U.S. Embassy was based. The U.S. would launch a counter to reclaim the cities, including Hue, which sadly saw the execution of 3,000 people by the North and Viet Cong. Meanwhile, in the United States, media coverage of journalists in Vietnam showed the brutal truth of the war and its American soldiers. This would make LBJ and the war very unpopular. The Americans would split into two parties, Doves wanting the war to end and Hawks wanting to escalate it. More controversy happened when US troops opened fire on about 500 innocent unarmed Vietnamese men, women, and children, what became the My Lai massacre, which made many Americans roar in terror and grief, blaming the war for the loss of so many innocent lives. The US eventually agreed to negotiate with Vietnam, which ended bombing campaigns in the North. Look, we promise we won't bomb you guys again, as long as Richard Nixon doesn't become president. Richard Nixon became president. Sorry, what? Richard Nixon became president. Oh. To improve his political status during a time where the war was absolutely unwinnable and unpopular, Nixon began Vietnamization in hopes that the South could fight the war on their own, this time by withdrawing US troops. Yes. Seems like the Americans are leaving. My country will finally be unified and free of all imperial oppression. Ho Chi Minh would pass away to a heart attack. Communist leaders would form the Communist Party of Vietnam to end the war. However, Richard Nixon was eager to win, and without the public's knowledge, hey, send a squadron of nuclear B-52 bombers to the border of the Soviet Union so they are scared of me, and then tell the bombers to come back. Nixon would order bombing campaigns on NLF and North Vietnamese camps near Cambodia, who launched an invasion to support the Communist Party Khmer Rouge, which then as a response, the US and South Vietnamese forces had to reunite to invade Cambodia to defend its democratic government. While that was happening, some South Vietnamese soldiers saw an advantage of cutting the Ho Chi Minh Trail off at Laos, but they failed. Pentagon papers with confidential documents and information were leaked to the public through New York Times. Growing US involvement.
What the heck? Nixon lied to us!
News of the invasion made Americans very angry, and they held nationwide protests to end the US involvement in Southeast Asia. Again, to preserve his presidential status, Nixon would, hey, Soviet Union and China, let's shake hands and put our beef aside for a bit, you know what I mean? By doing this, Nixon would also pressure North Vietnam by isolating it from its communist allies. 1972, the Easter Offensive saw another invasion on the South from the NLF and the North, which made US resort to bombing campaigns in North Vietnam again. With the devastation of Hanoi and Haiphong, the two sides decided to negotiate in Paris again, which led to the Paris Peace Accords being signed, which led to Nixon going through some crazy character development. There will be no more attacks on North Vietnam, the draft will end, and we will withdraw all US troops for good to end our involvement in Vietnam. However, the conflict between North and South Vietnam was still unresolved. South Vietnam became economically ruined. Seeing South Vietnam absolutely helpless with a confused and troubled president, the North takes this advantage to end the war once and for all. They would launch their final invasion in the Spring Offensive of 1975, capturing all cities in South Vietnam, including its capital, Saigon. US troops and diplomats at the US Embassy were ordered to evacuate, abandoning most of the Vietnamese people desperate to be saved and only rescuing a few. This event was known as the Fall of Saigon, which ended when North Vietnam forces raised the Viet Cong flag and made the southern capital their own, renaming it Ho Chi Minh City. And that was the end of the Vietnam War, and the domino theory never took effect, making many question, was there a purpose of the US getting involved in Vietnam? The country of Vietnam was finally reunified as one. It would become a war-driven nation, whom would go to war with Cambodia and its former ally, China.